everyone, and welcome to the second in a series of online commentary tracks for Transformers episodes with me, Chris Mcfeely. My second choice for commentary is this episode from Season 3, Carnage in C minor. Surely a well-known episode to most fans for the fact that it always winds up on the worst of lists of Transformers. But unlike Sea Change, it's a very deserved reputation. I would still consider Bot to be the worst episode of them all, but, well, I hadn't seen this episode. Its reputation precedes it, but I never saw it before the DVD releases of the series. And I said to myself, there's really no way that this could be as bad as everyone says it is there? It was. Genuinely. But let's try and make some sense of what we're seeing here anyway. This opening sequence is actually, it's somewhat foreshadowing planetary engines being used to move an asteroid with the intent of crashing it into Metroplex. This wouldn't be the first time that we would see the Decepticons use a plan. There's the first of your major animation errors, Soundwave, the same height as Devastator. Lovely stuff. And I think just coming up here is one of the more famous ones. Oh, and there's Devastator forming, even though we had already seen him. First appearance of Broadside in robot mode in this episode. Brawl and Huffer there, alive. Brawn, I should say. Brawn and Huffer alive on the side of the Decepticons. He just comes thick and fast. Anyway, like I was saying, engines being used to move this asteroid. Galvatron will go on to use this plan again in the Rebirth in Season 4 when he moved the entirety of Cybertron. And there was actually a whole deleted subplot from the episode Fight or Flee, in which Galvatron wanted to use planetary engines to transform the new planet from that episode, Paradron, into a mobile war world. So they were sort of, I don't know if like that concept gave birth to what we see in this episode, or if the fact that it was aborted was they decided to use it in this episode, if it was just coincidence, or if either of them inspired the Rebirth. But, you know, internal to the fiction of the universe, it's certainly nice to see that Galvatron stuck with an idea. Now, Broadside is in this episode. It's the only episode where he gets to do, you know, anything of remote importance. He's previously appeared, well, his jet mode previously appeared in Five Faces of Darkness and was exploded. So whether or not it was supposed to be him or not, we'll never know. And then his jet mode appeared again, and he spoke, and he was voiced by his regular actor, Bill Martin, in The Killing Jar, except he was a Decepticon. And then he appears in this episode. Okay, now we've got our first look at the guest stars of this episode. The inhabitants of Eurythma. Basso Profundo, the big one there. Allegra is the girl, and Zebop Scandana is the other fellow. You see, that's the thing about Carnage in C minor. The basic concept of the episode, it's infamous because of its exceptionally poor animation. It is inarguably, say what you will about the story, but it is inarguably the worst animated Transformers episode of all time, ever. The actual regularity of the mistakes is not too unusual. See, Broadside really should be about that large because he turns into an aircraft carrier. The regularity of the mistakes is not any greater than any other standard ACOM animated episode of Season 3, because Nelson Shin's South Korean animation company, ACOM, were just well known for their mistakes, unfortunately. But it's the scope of the mistakes. They're so tremendously awful, you know, as mistakes go. We've already seen Soundwave the size of Devastator, and it'll not be long here before we see Ultra Magnus picking up two Constructicons in his hands like they were toys and banging them together. Although, interestingly, it kind of matches the actual toy scale. That's about, you know, that setting the Devastator and the Soundwave toys next to each other. That's not too far off the scale, and neither is the individual Constructicons and the Ultra Magnus toy. There it is. There's the scene. You know, that's not too far off the actual scale of the real life toys.
Weapon? That was no weapon. That was harmonic bliss, a musical kiss.
Now, but yes, the animation aside, the concept of Carnage in C minor is not a bad one. It's one of the more interesting ideas for an alien race that Transformers, specifically season 3, because it was the one that was so full of alien races, that it served up. You know, a world where the entire culture, their language, their commerce, and their weapons, being the core of the episode, are all based around music, harmony, and melody. It's a world where language was surpassed in favor of the spoken word was surpassed in favor of the melody. It's not a bad idea, but they really terrible execution of a fair idea. Oh, Blaster's just describing it there. I'll actually get to the execution in a minute when we're exposed to it. It's kind of interesting, or, well, interesting might not be the... Oh, no, I'll just... This is your war, not ours. The idea... I would like to find... Who had the idea to have these aliens actually sing every line as a means of putting across the fact that music was their language? I mean, Blaster and Soundwave, for the duration of this episode, have to translate for the Autobots, and that works in principle, but not whenever all we're hearing is English words being sung. Obviously, I mean, it's not what's actually happening within the universe. They're just hearing some melodious noise that can't be understood by, that's not English, and Blaster and Soundwave have to take that noise and translate it, them being the sonic experts. But if they could have just used a noise instead of... See, I like that. That's a good concept, but it's so poorly executed. And that's to say nothing of the fact that the character designs basically had them as Renaissance elves. Renaissance elves. I mean, they look bad. One of the... Okay, there's plenty of strange stuff about this episode as it is, but one of the strangest things is that it is actually a Soundwave and Blaster, but a Soundwave-centric episode. Soundwave really faded off the scene in season 3. I mean, he was still there. He would still pop up from time to time, but he'd had 1984 and 1985 to sell his toy. He was definitely one of the characters who was slid aside for the new cast come 1986. So the fact that they decided to do an episode that centered on him was kind of odd. I'll be in the body shop for a week. Broadside, yes, going back to Broadside. This is not what Broadside's toy looks like. This design is based on an early prototype of Broadside that was never released. It's been seen in catalogue images, some catalogue images, the packaging illustration for 1986, and it was used for his Marvel Comics design, although Broadside didn't appear in the American Marvel Comics until Generation 2. He was one of the wreckers in the UK Marvel Comics, and he appeared with this design with a slightly different coloration, no red face, but it was much the same. But it doesn't look like the toy at all, the finished toy that was actually released. And while the comics never made any move to correct this in the cartoon series, completely redesigned Broadside's robot mode, and the new robot mode first appears it's quite a few episodes away yet actually in Grimlock's New Brain, when the new broadside makes his debut, and yet this episode would be the largest role broadside had in the cartoon by a country mile. The scale issues there, what the hell? Seriously. It's very redundant as well, because then they just repeat exactly what we have just heard them say. Okay, this business here. Let's cast our minds back to the start of the episodes when we saw the Autobots happily flying through space. And now they have suddenly, quite why Zebop can't even go inside Broadside's cockpit, perhaps we should not think about. But Blaster and Magnus now suddenly have to cling on to Broadside's wings to fly anywhere. But that might not be quite as mad as it seems, although because, going back to the very, very first episodes of Transformers, fans will remember that in the original 3-part miniseries, More Than Meets the Eye, the Autobots were quite happily flying all over the place. They didn't have any troubles in the air at all. But as the series progressed, that idea was dropped, and by season 2 they were repeatedly and confirmedly stating that Decepticons can fly, and it's a special power that they have, and Autobots can't, and they have to use jetpacks to fly everywhere. So then you get this episode, and it's not the only episode in season 3 which shows the Autobots flying around in space without any trouble. But so the temptation is just to write that off as some kind of mistake and be done with it. But once again, within the fiction of the universe, this episode, for all of its failings, gives us it's remarkably consistent about the Autobots being able to fly in space, and then once they get within an atmosphere, they're not able to. And it calls to mind a comment made by Optimus Prime in More Than Meets the Eye Part 3, when the Decepticons are escaping, and he says that they're too fast for the Autobots in the air. So, if you want to start waving your hands and say, well, there's probably an explanation for you, one can theorize that, perhaps the Autobots have rather weak propulsion systems that do the job, but don't allow them to cover great distances or move very fast, which is why they needed jetpacks to go over an ocean to Dinobot Island, or why they couldn't pursue the Decepticons effectively in More Than Meets the Eye Part 3. But which allow them to fly around in space without too much trouble, but don't function very well in an environment, an atmosphere, which is why they had to cling on to Broadside in this episode. So there you go. That's theory for you. Just seeing the way Galvatron was stood in the previous shot there, Rocky, what is going on with his head there? When you can always tell when an animation on an episode is lazy, when the characters, when they're not speaking, basically, they just stand stock still, and the poses that they strike, and this happens in quite a few ACOM episodes, the poses that they strike are identical to their line art, the model sheets that are used by the animators as a reference for how to draw the characters. IDW, the current Transformers comic book license holder, just released a book of this stuff called The Arc, a complete compendium of Transformers animation models. That'll show you, if you have that book, you'll see how the characters, what the reference art looks like, and quite a few times in ACOM animated episodes they will just freeze and strike these poses because the animators are being that lazy about it. This piece of background music in particular kind of jumps out because most of this episode is the third season synthesizer themes, but this is a real classic bit of music from season 1 and 2. Oh, poor Zebop. That's one of the most, probably the most unpleasant things to ever have to happen to a little squishy in the course of the Transformers cartoon. Of course, it's a constant fanficky thing, and if anybody read the Keepers trilogy of books by David Sian was one of the writers. They had stuff like that all the time, humans being stomped on and crushed and whatever. But this is the closest the original cartoon ever got to ours. It's Paul Eiding as Zebop. He's the voice of Perceptor, and Profundo's not around, but I'll just mention him anyway. He's voiced by Ed Gilbert. who in this episode will also be playing the voice of Superion. But he's also Blitzwing and Thrust.
Any sign of Ultra Magnus and the others?
Dan Gilvezan, or Gilvezan, I'm not sure how it's pronounced, as Hotspot there. He was the voice of Bumblebee. And he also plays Slammer, Slammer, and I also mean not Slammer, but Scamper, the little black car that came with Metroplex, who'll be creeping up for a brief appearance later in this episode. God, the design work on this episode is so bad. Look at this. See, you know, just the use of a melody, a noise, rather than them sitting there and singing every line. I'd just love to know who thought that was a good idea. I don't know if it was Buzz Dixon or not. Buzz Dixon was the writer of this episode. He was a major G.I. Joe writer. He also wrote, see off the top of my head, he also wrote Prime Target with Flint Dille. And things like Visionaries and Inhumanoids. It doesn't. I don't know. I don't know if it was him that came up with this or not, but it hurts the brain. It hurts the brain. Not to mention the fact that the ordinary Eurythmians really look very caveman-y and raggedy there next to the Renaissance wear of these characters.
Soundwave, the third part of the harmony. Capture it. Play it back. The complete harmony.
Soundwave spends the entirety of this episode as a giant tape deck. Normally when he transforms, as anybody would know, he shrinks down into either a human scaled size or a transformer scaled size, but he just uses a giant tape deck throughout the entirety of this. Pretty sure that's the only time this happened, and the only time that happened in the course of the cartoon.
Looks like we're running late. Galvatron and Soundwave.
Were they just flying through the air there? Maybe it wasn't. This episode wasn't as consistent as I thought.
What we did? Get on the track, Jack. We took the fall because you had to run it all.
Blaster, in the third season, developed this unusual rhyming habit. He didn't have it in the second season. He just talked like a radio DJ, and he still talks like a radio DJ, or 1980s radio DJ anyway, in the third season, but he really did rather abruptly develop this habit of rhyming nearly everything he said, not unlike Wheelie, which makes you... There's Scamper, one of his very rare appearances. Did he appear in robot mode otherwise? I'm not even sure if he did. I'm not even sure if Scamper appeared in robot mode anywhere else in the series. You see now Autobot City has mysteriously vanished and become replaced with... The big orange Autobot City is gone and replaced with the white Metro... See there, yep, there's Magnus and Perceptor flying inside an atmosphere, and well, they've decided that they can fit inside Broadside's cockpit now. So yeah, maybe this episode isn't as consistent with that factor as I thought. Well, you can still pretend.
How can they defeat our perfect sound?
Anti-sound.
White noise is not anti-sound, but
I don't want to see your ugly face. Just a button that says erase.
did you ever own a cassette player that had an erase button on it? And could you accomplish that fact by pressing the play and stop buttons at the same time? I don't think so. That's Jack Angel as Ultra Magnus with single eyes there in that shot instead of his visor goggles. Jack Angel played characters like Astro Train, Smokescreen, Ramjet. Just delivering the moral of the episode there. And it's a happy ending, and everybody sing. Oh, and I forgot this was on here. One of the several historical trailers that were tacked onto episodes to help bring them up to speed. I believe, I'm not 100% sure, but I think that these were created because episodes were simply running short because they had to cut a lot of stuff that was simply, the animation and stuff was just bad, and it had to be cut, and episodes were running short because of it. So they created these historical trailers. They're on most episodes out of the third season. Um, to fill for time, and there's ones featuring Metroplex and Tripticon and the Predacons and the Autobots, the Decepticons. There's one about Ultra Magnus. This one here is about the Quintessons. It's not telling you anything you don't know. I think it would have been very nice if the trailer could have actually named all the individual faces so that there wouldn't be any confusion about what they're called in the here and now, but they just named the face of death again. Most of these clips are just from Five Faces of Darkness with the grossly out of scale Silverbolt.
Their plot destroyed the Autobots' faith, and now, without a world of their own, they roam the universe with their Shockticons, making victims of whatever luckless beings cross their path. Their goal is to
I like the Quintessons. They don't get enough love.
and eradicate all Autobots and Decepticons. Yet, so manipulative and cunning are they.
All of this is ACOM animation as well, so you can see it's not quite as error-riddled as the episode itself, but there's plenty. Like, just look at the number of miscolored and generic Transformers in that. It's a hard shot. But that's Carnage in C minor. Go wash your eyes out. I'm going to do the same. Nope, but I still say that the worst episode of Transformers ever is Bot, and maybe I'll comment on that someday, but I don't know if the microphone would be able to pick up the sound through the thick layer of vomit that would be coating it. Hopefully you're not quite as bitter and twisted over this episode as I am, and I will see you again sometime in the future. Goodbye now.